Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Night had settled over the city like a thick veil. Streetlights cast a pale glow across the deserted sidewalks, while the distant sound of sirens mingled with the rushing wind. In the tense silence, a police vehicle slowly patrolled. On board, the agent Bradley Cooper, a police officer for over 15 years, he was feared for his arrogance and brutality. Many feared him, few dared to confront him. For him, every street was a territory to be controlled, every citizen a potential suspect. That evening, his gaze fell on a female figure. An elegant black woman had just parked a luxury sedan in front of a wealthy house. Her gait was calm, her attire impeccable, her presence natural. Bradley frowned. What is she doing here, he thought, already convinced that she had no place in this neighborhood. He abruptly got out of his vehicle, hands on his seatbelt, and approached her in his usual threatening tone. Hey you, madam. Identity. Show me your papers, and quickly. The woman turned to him. Her eyes shone with a quiet, almost unnerving confidence. Good evening, officer. I don't believe I broke the law. My name is Naomi Richardson. Bradley Rickenna. Richardson? We'll see about that. Do you think you can just walk around here without an explanation? He stood in front of her, imposing his presence. But the woman didn't give in. His voice was calm, firm. Your behavior is inappropriate. I advise you to remain professional. These words were enough to fuel Bradley's anger. With a sharp, brutal gesture, he raised his hand and slapped her hard. The slap echoed through the street, shocking the few passers-by present. Naomi didn't flinch. Her cheek flushed, her gaze still fixed, she said in an icy voice. You just made the biggest mistake of your career. Bradley sneered again, convinced of his impunity. But he was unaware of a truth that would turn his world upside down. This woman was not a simple citizen. She was the new head of the Internal Affairs Bureau, the one who had the power to judge and break police careers. And from that moment on, his had just begun to collapse. Agent Bradley Cooper watched the woman walk away, her back straight despite the slap he had just given her. A satisfied sneer played on her lips. Another one who wanted to stand up to me, he whispered, convinced he had won. Around him, a few outraged passers-by held up their phones, discreetly filming the scene. Bradley noticed, but he didn't care. He was used to it. In his mind, these videos were just hot air, a well-written report, a few intimidated witnesses, and the case would disappear as usual. As he climbed back into his patrol car, he thought that this woman, with her proud bearing and calm tone, deserved a lesson. In Bradley's eyes, she had committed the worst affront, not to have been afraid of him. On the way to the police station, he thought about his gesture. A well-aimed slap, like so many others he'd already given. He even sometimes talked about it with his colleagues, as an effective method for bringing back to reality those who dared to speak out. And never, ever, had he been punished. Arriving at the station, he pushed open the door to the dining hall. The smell of cold coffee and stale donuts hung in the air. His colleagues were there, gathered around, laughing loudly. One of them, Officer Miller, looked up when he saw him enter. So Brad, another eventful night, he said with a knowing smile. As always, Bradley replied, puffing out his chest, you know, some people don't understand otherwise. Laughter erupted, punctuated by friendly pats on the back. Bradley relished the awe-tinged respect. Here, he was at home, untouchable, protected by a culture of silence and unhealthy camaraderie. Sitting in his corner, Miller whispered to him in a low voice. Be careful though, Brad. With all these guys filming everything and putting it on the internet, one day it might come back to bite you. Bradley burst out laughing. Miller, open your eyes. We're the law here. You think a civilian can take us down? As long as I have my badge and my gun, I'm untouchable. He didn't know it yet, but at the same time, the woman he had slapped was already preparing for her first official meeting as head of the Internal Affairs Bureau, and soon, their next face-to-face would no longer take place on the street, but in a room where she would have all the power. The next morning, the police station was buzzing with unusual activity. Officers chatted in small groups, their serious faces a stark contrast to the usual atmosphere. There was talk of a mandatory general meeting, called urgently. Bradley arrived as usual, a few minutes late, a smug smile on his face, a cup of coffee in his hand. He noticed the silence that fell upon his entrance, but assumed it was due to his reputation. "So what's this meeting thing about?" he called to Miller as he sat down. "A big fish comes to talk this morning." "Someone from high places," replied his colleague, visibly nervous. Bradley shrugged. To him, he was probably just another bureaucrat giving a boring speech about discipline and statistics. A few moments later, the station captain entered the room, his solemn tone imposing silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, I ask for your full attention." Bradley stretched lazily, taking a sip of his coffee. The captain continued. "Today, we welcome an important figure. The new head of the Internal Affairs Office, responsible for monitoring and evaluating our practices, has come to address a few words to us." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some officers exchanged worried glances. Internal Affairs was feared, considered, the cops who watched the cops. Then the door opened. Into a heavy silence, a woman entered, straight, elegant, and confident. Her presence instantly commanded respect. Her gaze swept the room, and settled on Bradley. He felt his heart stop. His fingers tightened around his cup. The captain spoke in a solemn voice. "Welcome, Mrs. Naomi Richardson." A shudder ran through the room. Bradley felt his blood run cold. The woman he had slapped the day before, stood there, before him, implacably calm. Naomi approached the lectern and, in a clear voice, declared, "Hello everyone. I'm here for a specific mission, to usher in a new era of accountability. Abuse of power, unnecessary violence, and discrimination will no longer have a place in this department." Her gaze fell on Bradley again, just for a split second, enough to pin him to the spot. For the first time in years, Agent Bradley Cooper realized he might no longer be untouchable. A heavy silence reigned in the conference room. The officers, usually loud and confident, kept their eyes fixed on the woman at the lectern. Naomi Richardson didn't raise her voice, but every word resonated with authority. "I know this department has a complicated history. Buried complaints, humiliated citizens, videos circulating on social media that tarnish your image. All of that is over. My role is clear, to ensure that the law is respected by those who represent it." A murmur rippled through the room. Some agents looked down, others exchanged nervous glances. Bradley, on the other hand, felt suffocated. Every sentence Naomi said sounded like a hammer hitting his head. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but his hands were shaking imperceptibly. Naomi continued, her gaze subtly sliding towards him. "I will not tolerate abuse or cover-up. Every complaint will be investigated. Every lapse will be punished. No one is above the rules." At that, Bradley thought he saw a sparkle in her eyes. He knew she knew. That she hadn't forgotten. His neighbor, Miller, leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Brad, tell me it's not her." Bradley didn't respond. His clenched jaw betrayed his panic. Naomi concludes her speech with a firm voice. "I am here not to destroy, but to rebuild. But if any of you think you can continue as before, I warn you, the fall will be brutal." The room stood frozen for a few seconds before the captain spoke again, thanking Naomi. The officers applauded timidly, more out of obligation than conviction. Meanwhile, Bradley stared at the table in front of him, his heart pounding. He had never felt so vulnerable. For the first time, he realized that his badge and gun might not be enough to protect him. The slap he'd given the day before still echoed in his memory. But this time, it wasn't Naomi who'd been hit. It was her career, and it had just faltered. When the meeting was over, the officers left the room in silence, like schoolchildren after a sermon. The usually noisy and familiar atmosphere of the police station had transformed into one of icy distrust. Bradley, on the other hand, sat for a few moments, his eyes lost, his breath short. When he finally stood up, he felt the stares weighing on him. They were no longer admiring glances, or even respectful ones. They were looks of suspicion. In the locker room, Miller was waiting for him, nervous. "Brad, tell me the truth. She's the one, right? The woman you arrested yesterday?" "I told you to shut your mouth," Bradley replied dryly. "Don't you understand?" Miller insisted, his voice low. "She's not just some civilian. She's the head of internal affairs, man. If she decides to crush you, you don't stand a chance. None." Bradley slammed his locker and turned to him, his eyes bloodshot with anger. "Do you think she'll dare? She might be here to scare people, but I have my backers. I've been working here for 15 years, do you think they'll let me go?" But even as he said it, he didn't really believe it anymore. The atmosphere in the cafeteria had changed. Some officers who usually greeted him with a wink or a pat on the back had turned away as he approached. Others lowered their voices as soon as he passed by. He sat down at a table, alone, his tray in front of him. Conversations seemed to float in the air like poisonous whispers. "Do you think that's true?" Apparently he hit her. "If it's her, he's finished." Every word hit Bradley like an invisible arrow. He wanted to retort, to raise his voice, to remind everyone that he was still Agent Cooper, the tough guy, the one they respected, but for the first time, he felt that authority was slipping away from him. At the end of the day, alone in the deserted locker room, he stared at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes seemed more tired, heavier. A cold sweat trickled down his back. "Shit, what did I do?" he murmurs. The slap he thought was insignificant began to transform into a growing shadow that threatened to engulf him. 2 days later, Bradley received an official summons. A white envelope was waiting for him in his locker, marked with the seal of the Internal Affairs. He felt his heart race. His hands trembled as he tore the paper. "Agent Bradley Cooper, you are requested to report to the office of Ms. Naomi Richardson, Director of the Bureau of Internal Affairs, on the 14th at 9 a.m. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He reread the letter several times, hoping to find a way out. But the words were clear, he would have to confront the woman he had humiliated. When morning came, Bradley walked down the hallway to Naomi's office. Every step echoed like a condemnation. The agents he passed along the way gave him heavy looks, some tinged with pity, others with ill-concealed satisfaction. Arriving at the door, he took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in." Her voice, firm and calm, froze him. Bradley opened the door to find Naomi sitting behind a spotless desk. Her files were neatly lined up, and behind her, a screen displayed several videos. Recognizing them made his blood run cold, footage from the night he'd slapped her, already shared on social media. Naomi looked up at him. "Sit down, Agent Cooper." He obeyed, uneasy, unable to meet her gaze. "You know why you are here," she said in a calm voice. "Madam." He stammered. "No, there's no point in making excuses. On the 12th, in Riverdale, you slapped a citizen without just cause. That citizen was me. In front of witnesses. In front of cameras." Bradley swallowed hard. "I thought that you were suspicious, the neighborhood." Naomi slammed her pen down on the table. Her gaze hardened. "Shut up." A heavy silence filled the room. "You misused your badge. You committed an act of wanton violence. And you lied in your reports, as usual. But this time, the evidence is overwhelming. You're finished, Agent Cooper." Bradley, pale, attempted one last defense. "Mrs. Richardson. I've been here for 15 years, I've served this city. You're not going to destroy me over a slap." Naomi leaned in slightly, her icy gaze fixed on his. "You're right. This isn't just a slap in the face. It's for all the others, the ones you think you've buried. And this time, justice will speak. In the crowded courtroom at the police station, the air was thick with tension. The police officers present stood around, some puzzled, others worried, whispering among themselves. Lieutenant Morel, the officer who had slapped Amara, seemed nervous but tried to maintain a defiant posture, convinced that he was in no serious danger. Suddenly, the door opened. Amara entered, straight, calm, dressed in an impeccable suit. She was no longer just another black woman humiliated in the street. She now represented an entire institution. All eyes turned toward her, and an immediate silence fell. The chief commissioner stood up and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mrs. Amara Johnson, Chief of Internal Affairs of the State Police." A murmur of shock rippled through the room. Lieutenant Morel's eyes widened, his face ashen. His hands trembled slightly as he realized the magnitude of his gesture. He hadn't slapped a private citizen, he had assaulted the highest authority charged with overseeing police corruption and abuse. Amara walked forward slowly, placing her files on the table in front of her. Her voice rang out firmly. "Lieutenant Morel, yesterday you publicly humiliated me for no reason. You slapped me, convinced that your uniform gave you the right to crush whoever you wanted. What you don't know is that every abuse leaves a mark. And yours will not go unpunished." The silence was complete. Many of the police officers looked away, aware that their own actions could also be brought to light. Morel, pale, tried to stammer out a defense. I didn't know who you were." Amara stared at him coldly. "That's the problem, Lieutenant. You don't need to know who someone is to respect them." This sentence, simple but full of meaning, echoed throughout the room. A heavy silence reigned in the police station's conference room. All the officers had been urgently summoned. Officer Morel, still confident despite the rumors, wore a smirk. For him, this summons was merely a formality intended to calm the situation. But when Elise Laurent entered the room, accompanied by the chief superintendent, a shudder ran through the assembly. Her upright posture, her piercing gaze, and her badge displayed before all commanded respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," the commissioner declared firmly, "I officially present to you your new direct superior, the head of Internal Affairs, Madame Elise Laurent." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the room. Some people straightened up reflexively, others lowered their eyes, ashamed of having believed the gossip spread after the incident. Morel, on the other hand, paled. His smile disappeared, giving way to an expression of barely contained panic. Elise, implacable, spoke. "I chose not to file a complaint immediately after the assault I suffered. Not because I wanted to protect anyone, but because I wanted to observe your reactions." His words echoed like an invisible slap in the face through the room. The police officers realized then that they were all under his gaze, and that nothing would ever be the same again. She continued, her voice calm but sharp. "Respect for the law begins here, in this police station. I am here to put an end to abuse, discrimination, and gratuitous violence. And I warn you, every deviation will be punished." The silence became total. Morel, unable to meet her gaze, felt his legs tremble. For the first time, he understood that he had just sealed his own fate. In his small office, Morel sat behind his desk, his face pale and his hands trembling. He had never felt such fear. The slap he had given Elise Laurent the day before, which he had considered a simple act of authority, was now turning against him like a boomerang. He mentally replayed the events, Elise's calm, determined gaze, her firm voice, and the icy silence that followed her words in front of the entire brigade. He understood that he no longer had any support. Even his colleagues, once quick to support him, were now siding with the leader. "I have to find a way out," he whispered, rapping nervously on the desk. He tried calling a few influential contacts at the police station, hoping to hush up the matter. But each call ended in a polite refusal, accompanied by phrases such as, "Morel, you know there's nothing you can do. Elise isn't joking. You should prepare yourself to take responsibility for your actions." The phone fell heavily onto the desk. He felt loneliness wash over him. The wall of his office seemed to close in around him, reflecting the inevitable decline of his career. Meanwhile, Elise meticulously prepared the disciplinary file. Witness statements, surveillance camera videos, Morell's false reports, everything was collected, verified, and organized. Each piece of evidence reinforced the certainty that the sanction would be irrevocable. At the end of the day, Morell left the police station in silence, aware that his reputation and career had been shattered. The image of the slap, once a symbol of his power, had now become an indelible mark of his failure. A few days later, the case broke in the local media. Videos of the attack, testimonies from bystanders and the account of the police hierarchy were broadcast on all platforms. The name of Morell immediately became synonymous with brutality and abuse of power. In the police station's courtroom, a crowd of journalists and citizens had gathered. Cameras trained on the stage, capturing every word and every gesture. Morell entered, his face ashen, aware that every glance was a judgment. Elise Laurent, calm and imposing, stood up to speak before the disciplinary committee and the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing here is not an isolated incident. It reflects a culture of impunity that has persisted for too long in this department. The citizens we serve deserve respect and justice. Any deviation, any gratuitous violence, will be punished. The murmur of the assembly confirmed that his message had resonated. Journalists took note, citizens applauded softly, and Morell felt the weight of shame fall on his shoulders. Witnesses were called one by one, each confirming Morell's assault and abusive behavior. Video evidence was shown, the slap, Elise's reaction, the shocked silence of bystanders. The evidence was overwhelming. When the committee rendered its decision, the sentence was final: immediate removal of Agent Morell. With the possibility of civil and criminal proceedings, the entire room fell silent, absorbing the gravity of the decision. Elise impassively jotted down the details of the trial in her notebook, aware that this victory was only the first step in a larger reform. For Morell, reality hit home: his career, his honor, and his reputation had collapsed in an instant. A few weeks after the public trial, the Riverdale police station was no longer the same. The air was calmer, but charged with a new vigilance. The officers understood that abusive behavior would no longer be tolerated and that every action would be rigorously monitored. Elise Laurent sat behind her desk, gazing out the window at the streets illuminated by streetlights. Her posture was straight, her gaze attentive. Each file on her desk represented a step toward justice, a breakthrough for a department she wanted to be transparent and respectful. Citizens were beginning to notice the change. Thank you letters, congratulatory calls, and testimonials from satisfied citizens poured in. To them, Elise embodied the righteous authority that protected both citizens and the integrity of the police force. Bradley Morell, meanwhile, had disappeared from the radar. His name had become synonymous with brutality and injustice. The colleagues who had tried to protect him had distanced themselves, and his isolation was complete. For Elise, this victory was not a personal revenge. It was proof that change was possible, that the law could apply to everyone, even those who thought they were above her. She knew that other challenges awaited her, but this first battle strengthened her determination. She smiled slightly as she put the files away. Every step toward justice strengthened her conviction: as long as there were still abuses to correct, she would continue to fight. And in the police station, the lesson was now etched in everyone's mind: respect, integrity, and justice always prevail.